The Purple Line is a community podcast bringing you in-depth conversations with diverse leaders in the public and private sectors. Whether you're a student looking to gather advice or a professional tuning in for valuable resources, our dynamic programming provides tips for all ages and backgrounds. I'm your host, Keith Fernandez, and this is The Purple Line. Gil Coronado retired from the United States Air Force on August 1st, 1989, as a colonel after serving his country for 30 years. He is a vivid example of the American dream. Gil Coronado enlisted in the U.S. Air Force at the age of 16, and his life story reads like a novel. The recipient of such awards as a 1982 European Commander of the Year and a 1984 inductee into the U.S. Army Officer Candidate School Hall of Fame, Colonel Coronado was named the 1988 Serviceman of the Year by the American GI Forum of the United States and was a recipient of the League of United Latin American Citizens, LULAC, 1989 President's Award. Colonel Coronado initiated Public Law 142, which established National Hispanic Heritage Month on September 13, 1988. At a White House ceremony, President Ronald Reagan described Colonel Coronado as a stout defender of his Hispanic heritage and the United States of America. From December 1992 to December 1993, he served on the Presidential Transition Team at the Pentagon and then was named as Deputy Assistant Secretary at the Department of Veterans Affairs. In 1994, Gil Coronado was appointed by the President and confirmed by the U.S. Senate to serve as the 9th Director of the United States Selective Service System, the position he held until his retirement in May 2001. Gil's life history was then recorded into the congressional record in the 106th Congress, second session. Colonel Gil Coronado, thank you so much for joining us on Chili's A Purple Line. We're honored to have you, the father of Hispanic Heritage Month, and someone who created a holiday that so many of our listeners really have grown up with and almost taken for granted. It's an honor to have you on the show, sir. Thank you for your service to our nation. And we're very to see you here today, live via Zoom. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you, Keith.
Absolutely. Colonel, to get right into it, you're referred to as a Father Hispanic Heritage Month. It's a civilian title I know you're honored to hold. Can you briefly tell us a little bit about the history of Hispanic Heritage Month and your efforts to help expand Hispanic Heritage Month week into a whole month?
Okay, let me start with this. It really started in elementary school. When I first reported to the very first grade, along with all my compadres and comadres from the barrio, nobody spoke a single word of English. So we showed up and then we could not understand the teacher. There were some bumps in the road, but then the teacher did communicate with us to tell us that Spanish was bad, English was good. So then I would go home after class and nobody in my house spoke English. So they all spoke Spanish, so obviously they're not good people. I had mixed feelings about the basic thing was, who are we as Latinos, as Hispanics, who are we? And how do we fit in? That was the major driving force really for my whole life. So I explored a little bit later on in life. If you look at the history books, you'll see that there's a big void between 1492 and 1607. However, there's plenty of evidence that Latinos, Hispanics, Mestizos, that we were all here before the Pilgrims even arrived in Plymouth Rock. The western part of the United States is really very evident of the Hispanic culture. In architecture, the names of the rivers, the cities, the mountains, and even the states. So we know that in 1846, then when Mexico gave us the territories of California, Texas, they were all Mexicans. So it was their land before the war even declared that they could come over here and become US citizens. So yeah, today, modern America, we remain the invisible minority. Does anybody know? Do we know who we are? Do we know what our history is? It's a bad issue. So does anybody know, or does anybody care that Hispanics spent the 1940s, fighting for our country. We spent the 50s suffering in our country with economics and racism. We spent the 60s deciding what to call our children. We spent the 70s deciding what to call ourselves. And then I have a short quote that I want to give you from the US News and World Report from way back in 24 August 1981. And the quote goes like this: just as the Blacks put themselves in the center stage in the 60s, another minority group has, by winning dramatic political, social, and economic gains, put the nation on notice. The 1980s will be theirs. This will be the decade of the Hispanics. That turned out, in my opinion, to be a dud, completely a paper tiger. Nothing happened. I didn't see any progress. So that's what I took with me when I first arrived in DC.
And that's a really great background, Colonel. And I think one of the things that that really animates is the fact that there was a need to highlight Hispanics and Latinos throughout the country through our own month. And I know you took the lead on that. But how did we get from National Hispanic Heritage Week to Hispanic Heritage Month? What was that process of working with administration, the Reagan administration, then like, what was that like working with stakeholders and members of Congress? How did you convince them that this was something that we needed to do as a nation?
It was an interesting process. There was not a single member of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus that disagreed with me. I don't know how many members we had. It was a very small number back in February of 1985. But I spoke to every single member of the caucus and they all agreed, oh yes, we need that. What a great idea. A year later, I was upset. I'm a guy that likes to see results. And we were at a reception and there was at least 3 or 4 congressional members of the caucus. And I asked them, I said, look, you were sent here by your constituents to DC to enact laws that better their lives. And you all agree with me a year ago that you felt what I had to offer was good, but yet nobody's doing anything. Mm-hmm. You have the staff, you have the right to initiate a law. How does that work? And then when I was saying that in public at a reception to these 3 or 4 congressmen, and I was saying it in a sort of a loud voice because I was upset at them, there was a lady named called Elvira Castillo. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've heard that name before, but Elvira Castillo interrupted me and said, Colonel, I know the process. I can help you with that. Can you come by my office whenever? She was the executive director for the Hispanic Congressional Caucus. So Elvira then took me the next day and showed me how it works. Mm-hmm. First, we prepare a white paper. We'll take basically the 68 proclamation and put some of that language in, but we need to make a pros and cons, just a white paper that says, we want to do this. What is the present situation? What in the future? How is it going to help? And then we're going to go from there. And how much does it cost? Whatever. She was really good. Elvira Castillo did a lot for that effort. Then we did all that. And then the caucus would meet every other Tuesday or twice a month. I can't recall. Anyway, this would be presented as new business. So Elvira called me and said, hey, we just presented it as new business and they bought off on it. So now it's in their court. I said, great. That should have happened a year ago, but great. I'm very happy to hear it. So then Elvira told me she was going to handle the Hispanic organizations, the LULACers, the GI Forum. She was going to take care of all that to get the word out for them to support the effort and for me to continue lobbying the Congress. And I had met a lot of people in DC and through my wife who was working at the National Council of La Raza, Helen was working there at the time. I got very involved in a lot of congressmen, Hispanic as well as non-Hispanics. So I had a forum. I mean, I had good friends. Orrin Hatch from Utah became a very close personal friend. He would come over to the house and have dinner with us. The first guy I hit. And I told him what we needed. And he told me this, give me the paper. You worry about the House. I, Orrin Hatch, will take care of the Senate. He said, I guarantee you that we're going to help you on this effort. Great. So then the House. There was also some bumps in the road. I remember that, even within the Hispanic members. Some were not members of the caucus, but they were still the Hispanics. And when I walked in, one person told me, a congressman, I wasn't elected as a Hispanic congressman. I'm elected to serve my constituents. I agreed totally with him, and I asked him, I said, well, can you give me one example? You've been in office 5 years. You're coming up for re-election again for your third term. Can you give me an example of what bill you may have presented that was beneficial and helped the Hispanics in your district? And he stood up and he said, Colonel, this meeting is over. There's the door. You can leave right now. So it's not easy. It's not, oh yeah, everybody's going to jump on. No.
Yeah.
And then, since you know the political players, every member of Congress wants to be on the winning side. They're very hesitant to stick their nose out if it's not sure. So Elvira and I traced the numbers. 30, 40, Jesus, it took a long time, 50. And then all of a sudden it took off. And when it hit 100, it was like a skyrocket. All the way up. Hey, we got our 218.
Wow.
Let's go, right? Esteban Torres, who was the chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, called me and he says, hey, I want you to come to my office tomorrow because I want to present the bill. And I'd like for you to be standing right next to me when I do that. I said, sure, I'd be honored to do that. So we did. And so we then did that. And it was all about educating America on what the Hispanics were all about. The 68 proclamation claimed to do that, but nothing had happened. Absolutely nothing had happened. Now, there's a question that you posed because I had not thought about it, about President Reagan calling me a stout defender of the Hispanic heritage. And I've never even thought about it, but I did after I got the question. And the only connection I can make to you is this. In the late 70s, mid to late 70s, I was a commander at Lackland Air Force Base for about 900 troops, boys and girls, women and men. And I used to go in early. I used to go in very early, not all the time, but periodically, to have breakfast with them so I could chat with them and see how their life was, everything going okay, can I be of help? I walked into one of the dining rooms and I saw at least 4 feet of grapes stacked up in tables after table after table after table. And I said to myself, you know, Cesar Chavez has the great boycott. And it's clear to me that what happened was that the government stepped in and bought all those grapes because the boycott was working for Cesar Chavez.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then I felt in my heart, I needed to report this. I needed to vent with somebody. So I went to my boss. He was unsympathetic. I said permission to go to his boss's boss. So I continued on up the line. Nobody really wanted to do anything about it, but they all knew I was very upset. I don't know, 3 weeks later, I get a message that gave me 30 days to report to an Alaskan mountaintop for duty for 1 year without my family. And I thought to myself, boy, is that a coincidence or you earned it, kid?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, that's just the way it was. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so tell me about the day that, you know, President Reagan signed that National Hispanic Heritage Month proclamation. One of the things that we've heard is that you actually still have the pen somewhere that President Reagan used to sign that proclamation. And is there a moment you recall just being like, hey, this is incredible. Like, I know I've made it. I know I've made a difference. How was it to be at the White House seeing the president? Oh my gosh! And we see, for those listening, you see we see the pen on screen.
Pen. This is the pen. And let me tell you that I was very hesitant to take the pen. In my mind, I had originated an effort to convert it to a month instead of a week.
Right.
Reagan was celebrating Hispanic Heritage Week the last week before, because the law takes effect in January of the following year. So yes. I thought, okay, this is really not for me, because I was with a month. So maybe in 1989, then I'll get a pen if you know, when they declare the very first Hispanic Heritage Month. Okay, and then okay, and President Bush came into office, and I wasn't even invited to the celebration, so I don't know what happened. But I did not take the pen. A friend of mine took the pen, and then later on says, "You really deserve this, so I want you to have it." And then my daughter says, "There's an effort sometime in the future to create a museum in DC for the Latinos," and she wants me to be sure I save it. And give it to her so that she can, at some appropriate point in the future, present it to the Museum for History. And that was it. That's the way it worked. Now, I did have one thing with President Reagan that I wanted to do, and I kind of thought about it. He was the governor of California, so he knows what an abrazo is, right? And I said, God, it would be great if I can get President Reagan to give me an abrazo. Okay. But I never acted on it. I never had anybody ask for me. And then when the moment came that we were in the Rose Garden, I had too much respect for him as the president, too much respect for the office to even ask that question. So I never did. And to this day, I regret not asking him, may I have an abrazo? I wish I had asked, may I have an abrazo? Yeah.
Nowadays, it's so common, and I certainly hope you send that to the Smithsonian Museum for the American Latino. We had Danny Vargas, who was one of the drivers behind it on our last episode, so we'd love to see that. You know, getting towards Hispanic Heritage Month and when it starts, September 15th is a day that so many countries in Latin America celebrate their Independence Day: Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua. What does it say to you that we are very intentionally starting Hispanic Heritage Month on those days, honoring so many countries and so many people from those countries and the history and culture that they have all brought? Does it really indicate the respect for diversity of the Hispanic community? Because for so many who are not Hispanic or may not have grown up with Hispanic folks in their general vicinity, in their neighborhood, schools, etc., they might think it's a monolith when it's really more of a mosaic.
You're right. You're absolutely right. Now, the proclamation of 1968 had the dates of 15 and 16 September.
Yeah.
Because Mexico comes in on the 16th. When we expanded it to a month, then with the Americas, you got 30 somewhat nationalities. It's perfect. It is perfect. Yeah. So we can roll with all the Americas and let's get them all on board, because you are absolutely correct that their representation in our soil here in the United States is very evident. And we're all different. We have different tastes in food, in music, in culture. Everything is different. So Hispanics encompasses all the 30 nationalities, and it works out. However, what was meant by the Hispanic Heritage Month was zero in on education.
Yeah.
And basically, Hispanic Heritage Week tried to zero in on education. That was a dud. And it seems to me now, after all these years, that Hispanic Heritage Month is fizzling out, because we need educators to take charge. We need people to start putting something on the face of the uneducated and say, did you know? Did you know that this happened? Did you know that that happened? And get us in a history book, because if you get us in a history book, then we become human. Then we know where we fit in.
Yeah. Colonel, and I totally agree. Now, I know that we've had podcasts like this, or trying to spread awareness and spread the word and educate folks. What do you think folks who are usually, sort of younger on the end of the spectrum listening here to this podcast can do to help spread awareness? And what would you, how would you ask them to recommit to Hispanic Heritage Month, whether they identify as Hispanic or Latino or, Cuban American or Mexican American, or what tangible actions can they take to help spread awareness and really honor the work that's been done so far in establishing and promoting Hispanic Heritage Month?
I believe that it would take people like you, our younger generation. It would take people that you represent within the leadership. And now, when I was there, not at the leadership, when I was in DC, we must have had 7 or 8 maybe congressmen. So what do you have now? Close to 40? Or
yeah, it's much more. Yes.
So you've got power. There's power there.
Yeah.
Exercise that power to get America educated on what Hispanics have done to contribute to our nation's history, our nation's glory, and everything that's Hispanic in America.
Yeah.
Somehow get the Department of Education involved. I'm going to give you an example of what happened when I was in DC. I was reading an article, and the article was in the Washington Post that described Hispanics. They said Hispanics were poor or young, poor and uneducated. So I contacted the Census Bureau. Can I chat with somebody about this? Is that really the way you feel? Well, yeah, the numbers indicate that. Okay, well, how do you classify the census? Is there a possibility of you, Census Bureau, to create a subsection within the Hispanics and call it bread? I asked them bread, B-R-E-D. So take all the Hispanics that were born, raised, or educated in the United States, put them in one pot, then have the immigrants in another pot, and the odds are you're not going to be able to describe Hispanics as young, poor, uneducated. Well, that fell on deaf ears. Nobody was interested in doing that. So that's just one of the things that happens all the time. Yeah. You strike out, but that doesn't mean you quit, right? We keep going. You've got a lot of ammunition there where you're at. You've got a lot of congressmen that can support you. You've got America is becoming more sophisticated and I think more sensitive to the needs of its people. So I think it's a good subject you just raised. But however, the pitfall is this. The pitfall is that within the Hispanic community, we don't know enough about our own Hispanic community. And you brought up a point a few minutes ago, the different Chile, Argentina, Bolivia, El Salvador, they're all different and they all have different things. And we have to honor that and we should honor it. But within the Hispanic community, we don't have the knowledge to be able to effectively tell America, do you know who the Hispanics are and what they've done for our country?
That's right. Well, and I think that's a great call to action for so many of us, and especially as time has gone on. It's become more and more difficult to portray Hispanics as anything but a mosaic, both educationally, class, status. There are so many firsts that have been accomplished by so many greats, Hispanic men and women in Congress and business and so many places. You mentioned a life lesson around the census just now, and I wanted to pivot just a little bit away from Hispanic Heritage Month and towards your life story. You're a veteran. You've earned more than 35 military awards and decorations, including the Legion of Merit and the Bronze Star. Your experience really as a trailblazer is inspiring to so many who are probably starting their careers out and listening now, whether they're in college, first job. Are there any life lessons that you can impart to someone who, might be that 22, 23-year-old person listening now and going, well, life can be challenging or my job can be challenging. I don't really know what I want to do. What was the Gil Coronado School of Success like?
Okay, I will get to that, but I wanted to make, if I could, one more point
about
the Americas. Okay?
Yes, sir.
Now, our country, ever since I put on a uniform for the first time, even after I retired, and even today, our country has always concentrated on East-West relations There's been very, very little attention to North-South relations. And I think that's one of the things that the security of our country is going to find out, how important it is, and it's boiling right now in South America, how important it is that they zero in and get those allies back on track to defend us from any outside interference, because militarily, economically, we are way, way behind because nobody looks south. Everybody looked east and west, and that has to be changed. And I think there's a need for the national security geopolitical issues to be addressed at some level. Now,
Certainly.
yeah. Now, America, as you know, remains the greatest country on earth. America is the only place where each and every one of us has the right to dream a new dream. And I dared to dream. I faced many obstacles. I grew up in the west side of San Antonio. My mother died when I was 5 years old. I was troubled. I was angry. I had a lot of hatred in me. I denied God, and in fact, I blamed God for my misfortunes. When I was 15 years old, I decided I was going to leave the school for a reason that I'll explain in just a minute, and then went and took a test, and physical and a written test to join the military, but they had a waiting list back then, and they put me on the waiting list. They called me back 5 days after I turned 16. I turned 16, 5 days later was my report today to the military. So I did. And that is when I had a really rude awakening, because on the very first morning at 4:15 in the morning, some sergeant came in screaming and hollering and banging and getting everybody up. And I thought, I have made a very, very serious mistake in my life. How am I going to endure 4 years of this? Are you kidding me? But later on, you get to know that it's the discipline, the regimentation, the teamwork. And I started adapting. And I found myself for the very, very first time in my life being able to compete with my peers. I was being judged by the superiors with my peers. I was not being judged by the zip code that I lived in when I was 15 and under. I was not categorized. It was up to me to prove whether I could do a job or not, compete. Beautiful feeling inside of me. I liked it. Went through basic training. After that, they sent me, ironically enough, to clerk typist school. The only typing school I had ever, the only typewriter I had ever seen in my life was the one I borrowed to alter my birth certificate so I could go in underage. That's the only typewriter I had ever seen.
Wow.
Then, I don't know, 6, 8 weeks later, 72 words a minute, I graduated. 72 words a minute. I was being trained to do a job. After that, they sent me to crypto school. So out of basic, I got one stripe. I'm now a one striper. That when they went to crypto school to code and decode classified information and how it all works, I was the undergraduate. And then I got my second stripe. So now I'm two stripers. And I really thought that that was really neat because I was able to do all these things real quick. Okay, now I got settled into the base in Lake Charles, Louisiana. And I started playing basketball. And I played basketball at a certain level, elevated to the next level, elevated again to the next level. And my roommate, not roommate because they don't know rooms, my next door cot, was an all-state basketball player from Aurora, Illinois. He and I were invited then to try out for the base, for the entire base team. They might have gotten the wrong guy, but I made it and he did not. I made the base team. Little did I know when I made it that back in those days, if you belong, it was like a varsity base-wide team, that supersedes whatever job you got.
Oh,
It takes precedence over your job. If your duty says you're going to be at the communications center like me from 8 to 5, but then they have public announcement, members of the basketball team report to the gymnasium at 2 p.m. for practice. Then you leave and your boss has to let you go. Well, that did not sit well with my superiors because I was always going. Los años son como escobas que nos van barriendo hacia el destino. The future of our country, our nation of immigrants, and how one ethnic group would relate to the other will essentially depend on what we do or what we fail to do. We do have a young, eager, very well-educated and highly capable generation that awaits our moral leadership. The future is theirs. We have to prepare them. We must provide them the true history of our country. Our youth needs to know that our ancestors were, in fact, deeply involved in the drama of our nation. From discovery, exploration, and settlement to nation building. We must recognize that what is America is partly Hispanic, and what is Hispanic is totally American. Without Hispanic contribution, there would be no American as we know it today. Our youth needs to study, learn, and explore our nation's history and ethnic diversity. Those are the things that we have erected our nation's image and our global reputation. They need to know, our youth, there are no shortcuts to success. Nothing one achieves is because of luck or chance. It's all due to hard work, dedicated service. Life itself is like a piggy bank. You only get out what you put in. Education is the key. Education is the core principle. I want the youth to concentrate on the 3 E's: education, effort, excellence, and throw in a 4th E for good measure and call that enthusiasm. Get excited about your studies. Get excited about the changes you can make in the future. And don't be a face in the crowd. Dare to dream. Change sometimes begins with only a dream, but everybody can get involved in the struggle. We need to capture the attention, the mind, and indeed the very heart of the American moral conscience. Together we can touch some chord that will vibrate in eternity. Together we can all ring the bells of social justice that will long echo for generations to come with one message. It's solid, it's indisputable, and the message is, what is good for Hispanics is good for America, because Hispanics are good Americans. Our banner year is yet to come, but we remain confident that our youth will carry forward and somehow achieve our dream. They can use my beloved poem, a poem that carried me throughout my life, and I'll leave it with you as a conclusion. I am only one, but I am one. I cannot do everything, but I can do something. What I can do, I ought to do. And what I ought to do, by the grace of God, I will do. That's it, Keith.
Colonel, thank you so much for joining us here on the Purple Line. It's been an honor talking about Hispanic Heritage Month, how we can ensure that we honor the legacy of so many who have come before us, make progress for those that are coming after us, and ensure that we live our lives to the best of our ability. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. And thank you again for creating the month that we are all enjoying today.
And thank you, Keith, for the time and the effort put into this. Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And everybody else connected with Purple.
Thanks for listening to The Purple Line. You can follow me at _Keith Fernandez on Twitter, and make sure to follow CHLI across all social media platforms at the CHLI for the latest updates.